Hey, good morning. My name is Jesse. I'm the pastor here at Counterculture, and just want to welcome you if you're a first-time guest. It seems like we put out the word throughout the city a little bit, on social and mailers and whatnot, and we just see that as a welcome mat. It's kind of our welcome mat to the city to invite people in. If you don't get the word out, how are people going to find out? So we're just stoked that you're here. If you kind of took our invitation, and I just want to personally just say I'm just so thankful to have you this morning. And like Sam said, maybe you're not sure about dinner parties, you're not sure about some of these things, but maybe you just want to find out more about the church. We put these cards on your chair. Maybe it's kind of annoying. You throw it on the ground when you get there. But if you fill it out, drop it in the black box in the back, it'll give us the opportunity to kind of keep you in the loop about what's going on and just try to make it as seamless and as easy as possible to make friendships. That really is one of our core values at Counterculture, is just friendship. It's just having people who are there for you in the good times and in the bad times, having people to laugh with, to kick it with, and then also people who are there for you and you can be there for them when they're going through a difficult time. But we're starting this series called Modern Issues, Ancient Answers, and I've titled this message today, New World Crisis. I don't know if you've noticed, but we are living in the future, all right? Welcome to the future. You are in it. We are living it right now. We are living in the future, and I know this because my wife sat on my couch and ordered a fully electric car on her phone. This fully electric car, the process took about 30 minutes, okay? It was then dispensed, we have a photo of it, from a giant glass tower, like a vending machine in Phoenix, Arizona, and was delivered to her at her place of work a couple days later. All right, we are living in the future. We're living in the future. There's a man named Richard Browning from the UK who has invented an actual jetpack. And you can watch this guy if you Google him, Richard Browning, Gravity Industries. He can fly around on the water. He can fly around in stadiums. He performs shows. He's made a real jetpack. I know it's not the 80s. It's a little bit late, but we got our jetpacks, everyone. And he's sold them to the British Royal Navy. They're using it to go from ship to ship. There's another dude, a French guy. There's always the beef between the English and the French. There's a French guy named Frankie Zapata. He made a hoverboard. He looks like the Green Goblin. I'll just leave that for your own time. You check that out. We are living in the future. I don't know if you experienced a power outage this week with the absolute apocalyptic blizzard that settled in upon our city. I'm glad to finally see you all. You came out of your igloos and you joined me this morning. But glad that you're here. But when we had a power outage a couple of years ago, my 6-year-old's first response to all the lights cutting out, the power going off, was to go, "Alexa, Alexa is gone!" This was his reaction. This is the generation that we are growing up in. Things have changed. And you know you are living in the future when your mother-in-law is creating AI-generated art of your entire family. But you're living in the future when that's going on. Love you, Liz. Thanks for that one. We're living in the future. And in so many ways, that's great, right? I love technology. I'm obviously utilizing technology to show you pictures and project my voice. And my notes and my scriptures are on an iPad up here. So we are not like an Amish Luddite church by any stretch. But I am, unsure about technologies, just that it's a total net positive. I think this series, we're going to kind of examine some of the negative effects that we are experiencing as a result of all this progress. But some people, they're not willing really to acknowledge any negatives at all, or if any negatives do exist, they believe that science and technology will solve all of our problems. I found myself reading something called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. And it was written by a guy named Mark Andreessen. He's a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. And in the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, he says, "We believe that there is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology. Give us a real-world problem, and we can invent technology that will solve it." Now, I just want to make absolutely every qualification I can to say, I like technology. Like, I'm for it. I'm not advocating us, we go back to churning our own butter and driving like horse and buggies or anything. But, I do also want to acknowledge that, things like the way famine has been reduced, the way the smallpox vaccine alone just like radically increased life expectancy, things like pregnancy and childbirth mortality and the way that's been reduced in the modern era is just staggering. It's mind-boggling, and it's extremely good. And I think we should celebrate those things and give thanks to those things. So I'm not anti-technology, but I do want to just kind of push back against that question. Can technology solve all of our problems? Like, can it solve each and every problem? Steven Pinker seems to think so. Steven Pinker is a Harvard psychologist. He's very prominent, very famous, and extremely enthusiastic about human ingenuity and humans' ability to solve every problem, and very much anti-religion, very anti-God. But Steven Pinker said, "There can be no question which was the greatest era for culture. The answer has to be today, until it is superseded by tomorrow." And when I look at modern marvels like the Doritos Locos Taco, the vape pen, and Skibbity Toilet, I know that he's correct. Now, if you're not sure what Skibbity Toilet is, well, just consider yourself lucky, all right? Because it's coming for you. It's out there haunting your fifth grader cousin's brain, and you're going to find out about it soon. But seriously, the only dilemma with Steven Pinker's proposition with the techno-optimist viewpoint is that the wealthiest, the most technologically advanced, the most secular nations on the planet also are experiencing a tsunami of a crisis of both meaning and of mental health. The wealthiest, the most technologically advanced, the most secular, these are the very nations that are having a mental health crisis that is absolutely unprecedented. There was research done interviewing over 150,000 people in different nations across the world, and they discovered this, we'll put it up on the screen for you, is that the generalized anxiety disorder is significantly more prevalent and impairing in high-income countries than in low or middle-income countries. So many of us have been affected by anxiety disorder, the mental health crisis. We all know people who have been, but where is this worse? In wealthy countries. Poor countries aren't having a mental health crisis. Look at this. The number of new cases of depression worldwide increased 50% between 1990 and 2017. The highest increases in new cases were in regions with the highest socioeconomic income, especially in North America. And maybe you could say, well, that's just, Steven Pinker says, well, that's just because our standards have gone up. We've just kind of gone soft. Like, that's why we have this. But that's not the case. Want to know why I know that's not the case? Because it's not just that we go to therapy more, or we're more willing to talk about these issues, or more willing to do this. We are killing ourselves more than ever before. Check out these news headlines. I've been tracking this for years. The suicide rate and the drug overdose rate have reached their peak, their zenith. In the most recent year that we have all the data in for is 2022. 2022 is the highest rate of both drug overdoses and suicides in the United States. And guess what? The suicide rate in wealthy countries is exponentially higher than the suicide rate in poorer countries. You compare the suicide rate in Japan, which has an average income of like $34,000 a year, to Sierra Leone, which has an average individual income of $400 a year. Guess where more suicide takes place? Not in Sierra Leone. It happens in Japan. Why is this? What's causing this? Maybe you've heard about the the American white man who's left behind, the person who's been left behind as industry went overseas in these blue-collar workers. And certainly that does account for a certain amount of these deaths of despair, of suicide and overdose. But Peter Coy of the New York Times actually points to other research that says it's paradoxical and troubling that people in wealthy nations are experiencing mental health woes, and that some of these people are close to their peak earnings that are having suicide and depression and mental health crises. They've experienced little or no illness. They reside in some of the safest countries in the world, and they live in the most prosperous era of human history. Now, that's a lot of data, but let me just say, these are not just statistics. These are stories. These aren't just numbers. These are names. Let me tell you a name. Let me tell you the name Daniel Patrick Brown, a name that I'll never forget. I just started becoming friends with him during my junior year of high school. We just started hanging out. He was a year older than me. He was a star soccer player, funny guy, good looking, cool. And we just started hanging out at lunch and sitting together and eating together. And then he vanished. And everybody was panicking, Dan Brown's gone missing, he's gone missing, he's gone missing. Nobody knew where he was, and we were all curious. I think we had an assembly where it was talked about if you have any information about where Dan Brown is. And I'll never forget being in a movie theater, and back I had a flip phone, believe it or not, and getting a text from a friend and then a call, and I step out into the hallway and he telling me they found Dan. And turned out he'd gone out on his 18th birthday and purchased, a firearm, gone out into the desert, and taken his own life. And the way it rattled me to my very core, I cannot even explain. And the first time I ever spoke publicly to a crowd of people was addressing my classmates, the entire junior class, talking to them in the wake of Dan's life. That was the first time I ever spoke publicly. And any opportunity I get to say these words, because maybe you're here today and you've contemplated suicide, and I'm going to open up throughout the series about my own battle with mental health, but any chance I get the opportunity to say these words, I say them, and that's this. Suicide doesn't end your pain. It transfers it to everyone you love. And you so badly want the pain to end, and I'm going to open up in this series about how I've been diagnosed with a clinical mental health diagnosis, but so I know what it feels like, but I just want to say it doesn't end your pain. It transfers it to everyone you love. But so these aren't just statistics. These are stories. These aren't just numbers. These are names. And throughout this series, we're going to talk about some of the things that we're facing in the modern world. Things like anxiety, depression, loneliness, addiction. We're going to talk about busyness. We're going to talk about consumerism and materialism. And these are the issues that we're going to address. And I want to give some important caveats. And one is that I'm not a scholar, okay? I'm not a doctor. I'm not an academic. But what I am is I'm a survivor. I'm somebody who's experienced these things myself. And I've lived through it, and I want to share what wisdom I can and impart it to you. And I also want to say that I'm a huge supporter of therapists and psychologists. I'm a huge supporter of if you need it, medication, seeing a psychiatrist, getting prescription. Like, there is nothing wrong in that. There's no shame in that. I'm a huge supporter in that. But I also want to say that I think there is something deeper in our culture. Because we have the most medicine, don't we? And we have the most resources available to us, but we're still the ones struggling. Why? And I think it's because below the surface, we have a crisis of meaning. There's a crisis of meaning happening in Western, industrialized, scientifically advanced, technologically advanced countries. And I think there is something that we need that really makes life worth living. Okay, so the first thought I want to bring to your attention is it's when forwards is backwards. And our main passage today is going to be one verse. We'll look at it throughout the whole talk. It's this. This is what the Lord says. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where is the good way and walk in it. And you will find rest for your souls. But you said, we will not walk in it. So a little backstory for you. Jeremiah, he lived, a long time ago. He lived about 400 years, 500 years before Jesus. And he was living in Israel in a time before what, Bible people call the exile, okay? The exile. And the exile is this time where God has been patient with Israel for years and years and years, but they've been committed to worshiping sex and power and money instead of worshiping God. So they're worshiping sex, power, money. They're exploiting the poor. They're committed to oppression and injustice. And the exile is going to come where Babylon is going to come jack them and just destroy them and level them as an act of God's justice. And there's an actual part in chapter 5 of Jeremiah where they say, you ask why? Why has this happened? And it's so great. I think the response is so profound. The response goes, you worshiped foreign gods in your own land, and now you will serve foreigners in another land. In other words, instead of being a light to the nations like they were meant to be, they decided to be like the other nations. And being like the other nations, what were they committed to? They became committed to worshiping prosperity, worshiping, for us, we worship like the bull that's on Wall Street or whatever, but for them, they were worshiping actual bulls because that was how they kept their livelihoods, right? And so they're worshiping prosperity and money and power, and because of that, they're oppressing the poor. And maybe, I don't know how you feel about the Bible, but I think something you may like is if you read the Old Testament, it is loaded with warnings about injustice, loaded with warnings about oppressing the poor. Because when you worship things, you marginalize people. When you idolize things, you marginalize people. And so they're oppressing the poor. And God eventually, he says, oh, you want to be like Babylon? I'll show you how it feels to be a Babylonian. And so he's like, you want to be like them? You want to worship power and money and prosperity? I'll show you how it feels. You can go live your life under their boot. You can go experience what the consequences are like. And these nations that glorify violence and war and power, the way God primarily judges them is by giving them over to those destructive forces. You want to worship power, you want to worship greed, you want to worship this, you want to be destructive, well, you can be destroyed. Like, that's how God operates. And the scariest thing that God can do to someone is give them what they want. That's the scariest thing that God can do to someone. Now, I was amazed to read this in the Willamette Week. I was astounded to read this in the Willamette Week. And I'm just, reading your own newspaper for you, so don't get mad at me, all right? Like, I'm reading the Willamette Week to you, but it says this: Portland in 2023 was a town going through a breakup on a civic scale, with some people literally packing up U-Hauls and others severing emotional ties to certain ideals that had seemed core to the Rip City identity. There was once a dream that was Portland. It featured less incarceration, an end to the war on drugs, robust tax dollars for public services. Nearly all our most read stories in 2023 featured disillusionment with that vision. And obviously, I'm a person who cares profoundly and deeply about injustice, so don't misunderstand me. But I think the ethic of Portland being this place where you can just do whatever you want, there's no consequences, nobody should tell you what to do, just be free, I think we are experiencing the result of that sort of worldview. I think it's like, okay, yeah, you can do whatever you want, and there's people doing whatever they want in every corner, and we're kind of seeing the end of that in our city. C.S. Lewis, who was a former atheist, he was an Oxford scholar, he said this. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. We got it on the screens. We all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn. That's like military language, a U-turn, and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the one who's most progressive. And I think, to some extent, Portland's disillusionment, people are disillusioned. I've said this before, but when I moved to Portland in 2015, it was kind of like, you're lucky to be here. Like, you can come in our coffee shop, maybe. Like that was how it felt. But I don't get that anymore. I sense like a desperation in people's eyes, you know? And as 40,000 people have moved away from our city, you know, due to the overdose crisis and the rising crime rates and the homelessness crisis and everything, like there is a disillusionment, but I think that's an opportunity for an about turn. Now, I'm here not at all advocating some political ideology. I'm just saying, let's turn back to God. Like, forget Washington, D.C. I don't care about either of those bozos going to the White House. I just care about Jesus. Like that's what I'm interested in. And, excuse me. But, you know, in our culture, we're pretty infatuated with what's innovative, with what's groundbreaking, with what's novel. But if we could put Jeremiah 6:16 back up, he says, look at the ancient ways. Look at these ancient paths. And you can imagine someone in Jeremiah's day going like, I don't care about Moses. That guy lived like thousands of years ago, 1,000 years ago. I think it was 1,000 from Jeremiah's time. Don't come to me with that old, dusty Law of Moses book. I don't want that. I want to get with the times. I want to be like the other nations. I want to be cutting edge like Babylon. It's like, yeah, well, to Babylon you will go. You know, like you're going to experience that. But he's saying, hey, go back to the ancient paths. Walk in the old ways. And I'm not advocating at all that there's like some golden age that we need to return to, because no such time exists. You know, the 1800s, that's not the golden age. Like medieval time, that's not the golden age. But what I'm talking about is the ancient ways, the ways that were given from God, the ways of His vision, His intent. It's even more ancient. You know, it's further back beyond all of that. Now, luminary charismatics like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, they said they wanted to put a dent in the universe. They wanted to change the world. And they did. They succeeded. Like, they changed the world. But more and more data is just showing up that they didn't always change it for good. Sometimes changed it for worse. You know, as we live in this digital, capitalistic, just ecosystem, it's so overwhelming, and there is just a mountain of data, and I'll probably show it to you and as the series continues, just that excessive phone use and social media in particular basically caused the mental health crisis. And the point of this sermon is this. If you want to just know the whole point of the sermon, I guess you can get up and walk away after I say this. No, just kidding. Stay for the end. But the point of this sermon is what I'm trying to communicate is this. I believe the mental health crisis has been caused by misplaced priorities. And those misplaced priorities have been amplified by technology. That's what I'm trying to convey to you in this talk. But yeah, there's a mountain of data just showing that social media in particular has caused the mental health crisis to a great degree. And we want what's innovative, we want what's new, we want what's novel. But the thing that's wild about that kind of thinking is that we don't know if future generations are going to think we're absolute morons. Like you don't know where future generations are going to be like, oh my God, there was a time when like Teflon was like, everybody's got to get it. This is great. This is so cool. Or like, DDT. It's like, yes, this is the way to get rid of all the insects. Spray DDT on everything. Everybody's got to DDT. Hey, just so you know, that has caused like some of the worst cancer just in the entire world. There are things that seem so cutting edge. They seem so cool, but all the facts haven't come out yet. It doesn't always end up going so well. And maybe you're here and you don't believe in Jesus, and we literally started this church to be an environment of hospitality for skeptics, for people who are doubters. I tend to be a doubter. That's my own nature too. And so I wanted to start a church for doubters and skeptics. And maybe you're like, Amanda was up here reading the Apostles' Creed, and you're like, by the way, that's like the oldest summary of what the Bible teaches. It's the Apostles' Creed. The origins of it go all the way back to like the 1st and 2nd century, and then it was kind of more codified a bit more later on. But maybe as Amanda was reading the Apostles' Creed, you're like, I don't believe in that. 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 like maybe that's how you feel. But I want to pitch to you this idea. We're going to look at wisdom, ancient wisdom, for the next 5, 6 weeks of this series. And one of the advantages of ancient wisdom is that it's been vetted. It's been filtered down for like thousands of years. I mean, just to use the parlance of the day, you could say it's been through a selection process. Like ancient wisdom has been handed down. And so maybe you don't even believe in Jesus, but I just want to challenge you, stick it out for us for the next 6 weeks. Maybe just see, maybe there's wisdom that got passed over, that got jettisoned, that in our haste we moved on from, and maybe it's wisdom that we in our culture desperately need. So when forwards is backwards. Now the next thought is when what feels good doesn't end good. Most of our technological advances have really served one purpose. Let's make life as easy and pleasurable as possible. Like let's do everything we possibly can to make life as pleasurable and as convenient as we possibly can. That's been kind of the main goal of technology. But the more we've been obsessed with pleasure, it seems the less we have been pleased. Anne Lemke, I was listening to an interview with her. She's a psychologist near Stanford. I think she actually is at Stanford. And she's also been a practitioner. She's actually been a therapist in Silicon Valley. And what caught my attention to Anne Lemke was I was listening to this interview with her where she goes, I am a therapist in Silicon Valley. My clients are some of the most beautiful, rich, successful, powerful people on the planet, and they're miserable. I'm like, okay, I got to listen to whatever you have to say. And so I picked up her book. I read her book, Dopamine Nation, last year. And Anne Lemke says this: why in a time of unprecedented wealth, freedom, technological progress, and medical advancement do we appear to be unhappier and in more pain than ever? The reason we're all so miserable may be because we're working so hard to avoid being miserable. I don't know if you ever, when you were a little kid, got to go into like one of those candy stores at the mall. I've taken my kids there, I've gone in there myself, and I just have this distinct memory of being a little kid, and you go in there and you're just like in awe. It's so colorful. It's just like, this is where I need to live. Like, this is the place for me. You go in there and you get your little plastic baggie, and you can just put and you start mixing all these candies that have no business being together. But it's so good because it's bad, But you're getting like chocolate-covered pretzels and sour belts. You're getting like the hot tamales and just throwing it all in the bag. It's like, just goes right in here. Gummy bears, yeah, just right on top, You're layering it in. But I remember going home after that and like just scarfing the whole thing, like eating hot tamales with chocolate pretzels. That is wrong. But like you're just going for it, going crazy. And how do you feel afterwards? It's really fun, right? It's like a good time, especially when you're in the store. But then you down all of that in an afternoon, you feel horrible. You feel absolutely awful. I kind of think that as rich Westerners, we're living in the store. We're living in the store. I mean, we just have constant access to pleasure. Like nonstop, 24 hours a day, as much as you want, any kind you want, any flavor you want, any type you want, any texture you want, any crunchiness you want. Like it's all just coming at you all the time. And I think we sort of have a tummy ache. like I think that's what's going on. In Jeremiah 6:16 again, he says, ask where the good way is and walk in it. Ask where the good way is. What's the good life? Is just endless pleasure the good life? Andrew Sullivan, he writes for New York Magazine, he says this. He's actually responding to Steven Pinker. He says, for most of the Americans, For most of the ancients, very important, freedom was freedom from our natural desires and material needs. It rested on the mastery of these deep natural urges in favor of self-control, restraint, education into virtue. It placed community, the polis, ahead of the individual, and indeed could not conceive of the individual apart from the community into which he or she was born. They would look at our freedom and see licentiousness, chaos, and slavery to desire. They'd predict misery, not happiness, to be the result. Steven Pinker doesn't answer this question. Why, for example, is there so much profound discontent, depression, drug abuse, despair, addiction, and loneliness in the most advanced liberal societies? Humans adjust to new standards of material well-being, and they need ever and ever more to remain content. And that none of that solves the existential reality of our mortality, that we're going to die. And that none of it provides spiritual sustenance or meaning. In fact, it might make meaning much harder to attain. Hence, the trouble in modern souls. Yeah, profound. Profound. I like how Jeremiah says, or the Lord says to Jeremiah, ask where the good way is and walk in it. Walk in it. I'm the kind of guy I tend to be in a hurry. I'm part of it's that I'm just tall, right? Like when I'm with my wife, I walk like, I have to constantly go slow down because her legs are little and my legs are big. But I'm always kind of rushing, right? And it says to walk in the good way. We don't really want to walk in it, do we? We want to sprint in it. We want to race in it. We want to hoverboard in it. Like we want a one wheel in it. That's what we want to go fast in the way. We live in an era where we hire people on ZipRecruiter. We get our food on DoorDash. We look at photos on Instagram, and we complain about our high-speed internet. Like we live in a time where we want to go fast. And if you would have gone to the Facebook headquarters in the 2010s, in the headquarters, Zuckerberg had emblazoned on the wall a huge saying that said this: move fast and break things. But now, on the other side of it, that saying is kind of ironic. As loads of data is coming in that they've broken democracies. That Facebook, I don't know if you've watched some of these documentaries that have come out, Facebook has caused actual genocides to happen in other countries. That it's had a huge hand in breaking our democracy. That the information age very quickly, which was supposed to bring utopia, morphed into the disinformation age and the misinformation age. He said, move fast and break things. And what's he's done? He's broken teenage girls' brains. He's caused the suicide rate to go so high. And I think there's a danger to always wanting to go faster and faster and faster and faster. But what does this passage tell us? It tells us to walk in the good way, to walk in it, to slow down. Temptation always talks in the present tense, doesn't it? Temptation is like, now, you need this now. You need to make this decision. You need to feel good now. That's what temptation is always screaming at us. What feels good now? What will make you look good now? What's easier now? But where does those desires lead to in the long run? Play the long game is what I'm trying to say. Short-term convenience sometimes has long-term consequence. And that's just a general principle of wisdom that we see in the scriptures. If we only do, I try to teach my kids this, if you only do what feels good, your life will get worse and worse. But if you're willing to sometimes do what feels bad, what feels hard, what feels difficult, your life, generally speaking, will get better and better. Isn't that such an irony? If you only do what feels good, your life gets worse and worse. If you do what feels hard, your life gets better and better. That's just the reality of the world. All right, final thought this morning is this. When you get what you need, but not what you want. I was reading a book by the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, and he describes about how when he was a medical doctor, he encountered this guy named James, who was depressed, who was in ailing health, his body was basically falling apart. But he talked to James, and James said, I need you to help me. I need you to listen to me. I ruined my life. And he goes, how did you ruin your life? He's like, I won the lottery. I won $100 million. And he began to explain how he used to be a baker, and he used to work at a bake shop, and he had these meaningful relationships with his coworkers, and he had purpose. And then he won the lottery, and he moved away from his community, and he moved into this giant mansion, and hedonism and loneliness and isolation, his life and his body just collapsed from getting that $100 million. And he hadn't gone bankrupt or anything like that. It just had physically taken a toll on him. And Vivek Murthy actually, started writing a book. He's been the main siren on the loneliness crisis, which will be a whole sermon in this series. But I want to end here kind of talking about James and closing this thing down. And that's saying this. So why is it that the suicide rate is higher in wealthy countries? Why is it that the mental health crisis is so bad in the most technologically advanced countries? Well, Shigeru Oishi and Ed Diner said this: in wealthier countries, people tend to be more educated, individualistic, and have fewer children, and they're less religious. In poorer countries, it showed the exact opposite pattern. People were less educated, they were less individualistic, they were more religious, and they had more children. And then they conclude, religiosity led the pack and made individual residents rate their lives as more meaningful. In Jeremiah, it says this: my people have committed 2 sins. They've forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they've dug for themselves cisterns that can't hold any water. In our culture, we are swimming in luxuries, in pleasures, in conveniences, but we are starved for meaning. We're starved for meaning. And the Bible says, that the kingdom of heaven belongs to the poor. These poorer countries, they may not have all the luxuries that we have here this morning, but I think many of them, they know what matters most in life. And that's love, that's relationship. And I want to tell you that you become a Christian the moment you believe that God actually wants your highest good. That God's not holding out on you, that God's not trying to keep you from your fun, that he's not trying to restrict you, he's trying to protect you. He loves you. In this verse, he says, you will find rest for your souls. Maybe you're here this morning and you're tired. You've chased after money. You've chased after pleasure. You've chased after experiences. You've chased after status. And you're tired. You're weary. You're exhausted. I want to tell you, Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and you will find rest. Take my teaching upon you, for I'm gentle, I'm lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. I'll have the band come back up on stage. Father, I pray that people would come to you, Jesus, that we'd turn from our idols, we'd turn from the pleasure, the power, the materialism, the convenience, the status, the impressing others, Lord, and we'd come back to you. We'd come back to that ancient path, that we'd walk in the good way. Lord, turn us back to you. If you're here this morning and you feel tired, maybe you got a great night's sleep, but you just feel tired deep in your bones, deep in your soul. And you realize you have been living for the wrong things. Tried to live for pleasure, but the less you've been pleased. You could just pray this out loud to God from your heart, if that's you. Say, God, I've gone the wrong way. I need you. Help me with my temptations. Help me with my doubts. Help me to follow you. Put my trust in Jesus. Amen. Amen. Jesus, he bore our burden so that our burden could be light. Jesus got no rest in the Garden of Gethsemane. He had no rest so that we could find rest for our souls. Jesus, he walked the dead-end path that led to his execution so that you and I could walk in the good path that leads to our life. And if you prayed that prayer, I just want you to know that Jesus, he loves you, that he accepts you. He's not here to judge you or critique you or criticize you. He wants to turn you back from getting what you want so that you could get what you need. And if you pray that prayer, I just want to invite you to fill out one of these cards to make a decision. It's easy to make a decision in a moment of emotion, but then to not follow through on it. But you could check the box. You want to get baptized, or you want to, get in community or know one another. But thank you for joining us this morning, and we're going to take the Lord's Supper. We're going to remember the way Jesus bore our burdens on the cross, and we're going to sing together. Amen.